Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. Today's guest is David Washbrook. David is the co-founder of the B2B SaaS company, Look Who's Charging. LWC's technology was adopted by every major banking group in Australia and tech giants like Apple. LWC's service touched over 70% of the Australian population, and the business processed 8 times the volume of transactions of Visa, Mastercard, and EFTPOS combined. That's over 4 billion transactions a month. LWC was sold to Experian, and David left the business at the end of 2021. Since leaving, David has set up a venture fund, Centauri Ventures, which has made over a dozen direct investments, primarily in early-stage high-growth companies. In addition, he's the founder of Helios Technologies, a technology-driven company working on a number of projects to help drive the transition to clean energy. David, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dexter. Thanks very much for having me.
This is crazy. This is your debut, right? We've known each other for how long? I'd call you a friend.
2018, I think, wasn't it? 2017, 2018 at Fintech dinner.
Yeah. We're here to talk about, I guess, how we met, which was Look Who's Charging, and the journey that you went on. I met you really early on in that journey, and it's just been incredible to watch, what you and Stuart have done and you built, and the kind of success that you had. But yeah, before we I did a little bit of an intro before we spoke about Look Who's Charging. But do you want to kind of tell the listeners a little bit about the business, and we'll then talk about the origins and how you got it started?
Yeah, thanks, Dexter. So, Look Who's Charging. It was really, the business was born out of that frustrating everyday problem I think everyone can relate to, of looking at your bank statement, and half the time it may as well be written in a language you don't understand. You look at your statement and see Wollongong, New South Wales. You turn to Google, it's not going to help you. You phone up the bank's call center, 20, 30 minutes, bounce between different divisions, and at the end of the day, they can't do anything more than Google it itself. So Wollongong, New South Wales, that was a Woolworths store in Wollongong, for example, just one of the many, tens of millions of confusing descriptors on the bank statements. So it's a very frustrating problem, I think, both myself and Stuart had experienced as consumers. And as we unpicked the market a bit, realized how big a problem it was for the banks. They're receiving, tens of millions of calls a year of people, don't understand, where their money has gone. So it's a very, very frustrating problem for consumers, but also a very expensive problem for banks. So Stuart, as he does, then sort of locked himself up for a year, a million lines of code later, and he'd basically pulled together a solution that, matched up the 100 million different descriptors within the Australian marketplace back to about 1 million card accepting merchants. So that was the solution he built, hosted in the cloud, and then had APIs that were pushing that information to the banks. So any of the listeners out there, anyone who banks with any bank in the country or uses Apple Wallet or Apple Maps, any banking country other than CBA would have experienced our data within the banking app. So it's quite a simple problem to understand. You can explain it to your hairdresser or your gardener in a few seconds and they get it. A very, very complex problem to solve. So that was Look Who's Charging. We sort of very much the focus of cleaning up the data within the digital banking apps. But fast forward a couple of years, and there's many use cases beyond that. With one of the big 4 banks, just before we left, we signed our 14th engagement. There's 14 different teams within that bank that we were working with. Yeah. So that's kind of the look who's charging business in a nutshell.
So let's kind of go back to the early days. So you talked about Stuart locking himself away, and I remember kind of catching up with Stuart himself and talking about that process. But how did you guys kind of get together in the first place, and what was it that sparked the hey, there's a partnership here that could, and a team that could potentially work?
Yeah, it's a good point, Dexter. And look, sort of Stuart and myself, I think, and his wife Nicole was also in the business in the early stages, but made a great team. I think our skill sets complemented each other very well. So Stuart, obviously wrote all the code, technically, exceptional. But he could also, speak with clients. He could also help with the sales cycle. He understood enough about other aspects of the business. Then I could sort of come in and pick sort of everything. I could let Stuart basically focus on the product and the tech, and I could pick up every other aspect of the business, whether it was the finance, the tax, the accounting, HR, the sales cycle with the banks, the legals, et cetera, et cetera. So I think between the three of us, we had every aspect of the business covered, which really helped us in the early stages.
So what was your background prior to Look Who's Charging?
So my background was an accountant. I spent 15 years at KPMG working on a variety of sort of M&A transactions, capital raisings, IPOs, etc. But I think why I left that, I'd sort of built a few businesses on the side, none of them of any real scale, but realized I had a real passion for building and creating things. And I think back to your sort of earlier question, Stuart and I got to know each other through rowing surf boats at Manly Lifesaving Club. It was the first thing I did when I arrived here from the UK, was join the surf club and ended up in a crew with Stuart. He built another business at the time, and I was toying around as a bit of a side hobby on a few other businesses. So we sort of formed a very strong relationship and spent a lot of our time, talking and chatting about businesses. Then I guess this one came along, and the opportunity felt very real and very exciting. So we both jumped in and full steam ahead.
Yeah. So I guess my kind of impression of Stuart, having spent quite a bit of time with him, very similar to in many ways, I think, to Dom Pym, in that I'd class them as almost more of an inventor than an entrepreneur, but still like really commercially astute, and very much a problem solver, and builds products to solve real problems that real people have, but then has that added element of understanding the commercial bit. What was kind of your sense of Stuart when you met him, that you thought, this is kind of a really good complement to my skills?
Yeah, look, it's a good point. I've spent a bit of time with Dom Pym. I don't think Stuart's actually met him. I'd love to sort of get them to meet one day, because I think they are both both pretty similar. But it's really, that's what Stuart loves doing. He loves sort of creating things from scratch. Less around the administration side of a business. And I think that was the real skill set that I could bring around, everything else other than writing the code and building the product. I think we both as well just love moving super quick. When you're in the corporate land, to get from A to B, you also, you a lot of the time have to take quite a windy road to take people along for the journey, whereas both Stuart and me, it's the absolute shortest line. If there's brick walls or mountains, whatever's in the way, we're straight from A to B, smashing through stuff as fast as we can. Which not necessarily doesn't serve you the best, I think, in a lot of environments. But when you're in an early stage startup, fighting to survive, I think it's a great skill. So we were both very, very in tune from that respect, not afraid to get our hands dirty. We're both very hands-on with doing things, work very, very long, very, very hard hours, and then have those sort of complementary skill sets as well to make the business successful.
So you guys were bootstrapped, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Dexter. We were pretty old school. It was back in when we were starting to get the business going, 2016, 2017. We hadn't quite signed NAB, which was our first customer. So there's probably only a few VCs. The landscape was very different back then.
Yeah.
I think fintech was only just becoming a word. We went out and sort of saw a handful, but we were getting $100,000 for 10-20% of your business. And,
yeah. Sounds like Dragon's Den.
Yeah, and we both.
I'm out.
Yeah, look, it doesn't even get you sort of a PA and a cleaner in Australia.
It doesn't, right? Yeah.
So we're like, we may as well put another decimal point on the mortgage, right, and hold the equity. But then we were able to get some quick traction with NAB and later ANZ and a few other banks. But they were very good in terms of paying in advance and around implementation fees and payment up front. So we got some great working capital into the business pretty quickly when those banks were signed. That we didn't have a need necessarily for funding.
I've got to stop you here, right? Because you've probably missed out about 3 or 4 steps here. Like, you don't just rock up to NAB and ANZ and go, yeah, we've got something, Stuart's done a million lines of code or whatever. No backing, just 2 guys rocking up. Like, how on earth did you get the meetings in the first place and start to have discussions with the right people who had the problem and get the credibility that they were going to basically put money up front? I mean, going back to the time, Stuart, it was going back to the time, David, there was a lot of innovation theater and guys, put us a prototype together and we'll kind of see whether we want to run with it. And there was a lot of people getting burnt that way, yet you guys get them to stump up money up front for you to go and kind of essentially kind of implement the thing. How did you do that?
Yeah, well, it's a good point. It's a decision we made early on, Dexter. It was a quote I heard maybe one of your sort of peers in the UK does a fintech podcast that the banks, they have more pilots than British Airways or Qantas running. So we did make the decision pretty early on, I think, to avoid going down that route, which was good. We were also both incredibly naive, which I think worked in our favor. Neither of us had an enterprise sales background and neither of us had any real experience in financial services. So to us, it's pretty simple. Here's a real problem and here's a solution. And we were probably a bit of luck involved, to be honest, with NAB at the time. The COO and Luke, who I think you've met over there at NAB as well. They'd spent an afternoon in the call center and they'd sat there with phone call after phone call coming through to the bank of people phoning up, literally stepping through their statement line by line, going, "What's this? What's this? JJR Enterprises, what's this? Gotham City Auto, what's this? David Washbrook Pty Limited, what's this? Etc. Etc." So it was probably a chance then that it'd become a real problem for them. They were trying to work with one of the big schemes out there to come up with a solution. A bit of right time, right place. So it was a problem they'd identified, but also finding the right people. At the 30,000 people organizations, there are a lot of people in those organizations who I think, don't necessarily want to, they're not necessarily incentivized or rewarded to do something different, right? If they don't mess up, they can probably make a career. Whereas if they put themselves out there, try and do something new and fails, there's not sort of that environment. So it's finding really the right people at the organizations who will take a bit of a risk. So we were lucky, I guess, in that respect as well, to come across the right people very quickly. And it was a very quick process with NAB, 8 months from start to go live, which at the time we thought was incredibly long, but having been in the industry now for a few years, realized it's exceptionally quick process.
So we'll talk about that process in a minute. But one of the other things I want to kind of ask you about is, enterprise sales, going out and asking for investment. These types of processes are fraught with danger, and oftentimes you get caught in scenarios where there's often people trying to take advantage of you and put you into positions where you feel like you're almost backed into a corner. How did you kind of navigate the negotiations with VCs or big four banks to ensure that you were still retaining ownership of Look Who's Charging?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dexter. And look, in the early days, it's very, very hard, right? Because the balance of power in the early days, you are struggling to survive, right? It's, you're on a very tight thread every single day in the early days. It's hard. Look, as you become more established, the balance of power definitely shifts. And, in our latter years, there were some big, global enterprises, some of the biggest enterprises in the world we would just say no to. It's like, this is the deal, take it or leave it. But in those early days, it's much, much harder. I'd say our overall experience was pretty good and pretty fair. We didn't have to deal with VCs because we were bootstrapped, but on the whole, dealing with the large banks, I think they're probably used to working with large organizations where things take forever and the bill is very, very big. We put forward what we thought was a pretty reasonable, amount for them to pay, and it's probably a fraction of what they pay for services that add less value. Working with these other big organizations. So generally, it was a pretty good experience, and as I said, they were very good as well with sort of payment terms, etc., which was pretty critical for us in the earlier stages. But it almost shifts before you know it. One day you're waking up and your inbox is empty. You're having to work the phones really hard. You're probably giving away more than you want to in negotiations, but all of a sudden, before you know it, that flywheel starts turning, and you wake up every day and you're no longer doing anything proactive. You're looking at your inbox and deciding which of the 20 opportunities you're gonna pick up. So, and it
happened that fast in your experience, did it?
It felt like it did. And it's probably adapting your mindset a bit as well to move and change when that does happen. But it's a good position, I think, for the business to be in. We were very fortunate to get there. But it's also, trying to then still remain proactive with, developing new products, working with new clients, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, we did a blog interview all the way back in, I think it was the end of 2018. And you said something to me which has stuck with me ever since. And I've kind of used and kind of, wouldn't say plagiarized, because I always credit you with coming up with this, I guess, trifecta, I would say, of success, which was really, I guess I'd ask you the question around how did you get to kind of the big four banks on board as quickly as you did? And I think there were three things that you'd mentioned that you had to have in place for the banks to feel comfortable and move quickly, so that you weren't getting embroiled in the innovation theater and there was like genuine intent there. I don't know if you can remember that, but if you can, could you maybe share with the listeners what those three things were?
Yeah, it's a good point, Dexter. And you're taking me back a bit there to, I think it was before you got the podcast.
It was, it was.
Yep. Going. But yeah, it's really, definitely three things with a bank, but it probably applies equally to whatever industry you're in when you're talking about enterprise sales. You have to save the organization money, improve the customer experience, and if there's a regulatory angle as well. So if you can tick the regulatory box on its own, but if you're ticking two or all three of those boxes, it becomes a much easier sell. There's a lot of solutions out there that are purely the CX, the customer experience box. That's a much harder one to get through with the banks. If you can bring a cost saving angle to that as well, it makes it much easier. So look, most banks work off around about a 3x. So, if they spend $1,000, they want it to save them $3,000. So we could go there, after a little while with some pretty hard evidence, and we were going, look, this is a no-brainer, significantly improves the customer experience. People aren't phoning up on hold for an hour anymore, especially with COVID hitting and, all the issues they had with call centers at that time. But we could also demonstrate a 10x savings in costs as well, so far above their sort of 3 to 5 times what they were working off. So yeah, being quite sort of tangible with what you're putting to them as well, I think definitely has a benefit. And there's probably the one other lesson with banks. It's really keep knocking on that door and it will eventually open. There's one of the big 4 banks. I've still got the list here. I went through 70 people, right from the CEO at the top all the way down to pretty much the teller on the tills. 70 people. We invested a heap of time. We completely wrote them off. Then had a chance meeting at an RFI conference, and within 7, 8, 9 months later, we're live. With that big 4 bank. So it's if you believe in yourself and your solution, just keep knocking. No matter how many no's you get, keep knocking. And these big places, you'll eventually find someone who will take a risk on you.
Yeah. Now, so you get 3 of the big 4 banks on board. This is the point where the Hollywood movie ends and everybody's doing high fives and you live happily ever after. Nothing's ever that simple. So what were some of the key challenges that you then faced once you'd got into the banks?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. And, this is where you'd come in, I think, with your skills and expertise. It's really scaling up the people, I think, within the business then to, take it to other countries or other places. So we were kind of just getting to the point of, sort of going through that process when, with Experian, the transaction happened with Experian, and the business became part of their organization. So look, it was very early, in hindsight, it was very early. We should have probably kept going at it for a few more years first. But then once that acquisition happened, I guess that came with a whole new sort of set of dynamics, which we had to work through over the course of the last 2 years or so.
And in terms of, I guess, the shifts that then you had Experian come in, what was it? What was it like for you? And I don't want you to speak on behalf of Stuart, but what was it like for you both? Kind of having built this business, moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, just pushing through obstacles to then be part of a multinational corporation.
Yeah, and look, it's probably an area where our naivety probably played to our advantage when we started off selling to the banks, but probably went against us. The kind of the rationale of the deal was they had some groundbreaking open banking tech out of the UK, the sort of the market leader with the products they had over there. So it's kind of bring that technology to Australia, combine it with Look Who's Charging, and go for sort of real sort of growth through the market from combining those two services, and likewise taking what Look Who's Charging's done and taking it to other jurisdictions overseas. So in our minds, that could all happen pretty quick. When you parachute into a large organization with lots and lots of different layers, that stuff takes a long time. And unfortunately, it didn't really happen, through the period that we were in the business. We were very used to working in, everything we did was, minutes, hours, days at most. But when your organization grows, or bigger organizations, it's probably, days, weeks, or months, or even years they operate. So it's a very sort of different turn of pace, which took probably a bit of getting used to for us. We were that, Tesla Model S plaid on the fast lane of the Autobahn going through Germany, and then, all of a sudden to driving through the school zone at 40k an hour, a bit of a change, but we still did keep a reasonable amount of autonomy, and we were able to more than triple the size of that business in the last 2 years.
And I guess, from the perspective of an exit, what was it that kind of made you decide to sell the business?
Yeah, so look, it's a good question, Dexter. I don't know.
You're allowed to say money. it's perfectly feasible answer.
Well, yeah, sort of. Well, yeah, what it was probably money's not the key driver of this. I guess we got to a junction, right, of, we've got Australia largely done, or we're in the process of getting it done. We had the big four banks, and we had the fifth, sixth, seventh, but we had pretty much everyone in, everyone in the country, as well as,
I remember that chat that we had. I think was it the morning after the Finnies in 2019, and we were talking about an enterprise sales hire. And I remember saying to you and Stuart, guys, you got like 85% of the market. What's an enterprise salesperson going to bring to you? And you talked about that thing of, three times, bringing in 3 times the cost in value. I look at hires as being the same thing, and I just couldn't see where, that person was going to, significantly have an impact on the business.
Yeah, that's right. It was always a sort of land and expand model. Like I said earlier, we got in there, did one thing, did it very well, and then expanded through the banks. But that kind of happened through our developers, right, and through the people who had the relationships with those teams, as opposed to, through a sales cycle. So anyway, I guess we were getting to the point of, right, we have to grow this thing now, probably leave Australian shores. Would we be better off doing that ourselves, or, joining forces with a larger organization? And we really sort of thought the latter, at the time.
Do you think, kind of the fact that you were bootstrapped and therefore, you had kind of 100% ownership of the business made it a bit easier as well so you're kind of looking at whatever the sum was, that's all money that's going to you and Stuart. It's not, being divvied out between investors, and you got a, small percentage of equity of that.
Oh, look, I think being bootstrapped definitely has its advantages. So yeah, that's one of them. Another one is we could make instant decisions. I've seen a few term sheets out there around town. Even VCs taking, minority stake, some of the supermajority, board supermajority director shareholder clauses they're putting in these agreements. And I guess it takes some of the decision-making power away from the founders, but it also creates this layer of bureaucracy and admin, right? If we wanted to do something, I'd speak to Stu, he'd speak to me, and we'd make very quick decisions. We didn't have to go through a whole process of, various approvals. So I think being bootstrapped enabled us to go, very quick from a decision-making perspective. Probably the downside of it was we ran, we had some exceptional people, in our team, but we ran a very small, very lean team. This was a significantly sized sort of fintech business, and, it was done with 12 people. So very, very lean, skinny team. Which probably, I guess, if you'd taken on more money from the start, arguably, we would have had a bigger team. Bigger teams come with their own challenges, but, perhaps it would have taken a bit of that pressure off us being so hands-on in the business, and perhaps, burning out a bit, going too hard, and having a bigger team from the beginning. So yeah, it definitely has its advantages, but also, probably some disadvantages as well.
Now, you finished with Look Who's Charging, exited the business at the end of last year. What was that like emotionally for you to kind of move on and say goodbye?
Yeah, look, it was pretty bittersweet. I think it's it's very tough because it's been your life. It was 365 days a year. It was your life for 5-6 years, and the team that you build up is almost like a second family, and it's a very definitive sort of end. I'd probably liken it to when you see some of these, athletes in the grand final or the Olympic final. It's your life, nothing else. Then all of a sudden one day it stops.
Yeah.
We didn't really have the time. We had a very definitive deadline with the way we structured the deal. Sort of we sold the business, but most of the targets were still contingent on a defined point in time where we could get the business to. So it really was no 100% focus right up till that very day. So it wasn't like a gradual transition or anything. It was very abrupt, which look, it's tough. No one's getting their violins out for you, but it is, just I guess seeing what you've built and the team you've built, and going from being in control of that to walking away almost overnight. It's quite tough, but that's okay. I think we both myself and Stu and Nicole recognise that taking a bit of time after that, I think to recoup and really think about what comes next, I think has been wise as well. So there's a whole heap of opportunities come to you that you could jump straight into, but taking a bit of time, and there was a reasonable amount of capital brought in to buy out Look Who's Charging from overseas, right? It was an overseas entity that bought us, so that capital's come in, and then sort of myself and Stuart sort of recycling that capital as well a bit through the ecosystem within Australia. So it's coming from overseas, and then we can put some of that to work to help the next sort of generation of startups. Both, I guess it's the 3 T's, Dexter, isn't it? It's your time, talent, and treasure. So, we've been bringing a bit of treasure, but also, our time / our talent as well to help, mentor some of these startups. Right?
Yeah. When you're kind of looking at this next wave of startups, what are, kind of some of your observations? Do you see that, there's maybe, a little bit more kind of nous now than perhaps when you got started, and also a bit more support and experience out there?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think the support network, is fundamentally shifted. I mean, you go back, when sort of Stuart had some of his previous businesses. I don't even know if there was a single VC in Australia. There's probably, in the early 2000s. And then you go through sort of 2015, 2016, there's probably a couple of VCs. I think Fintech at Australia had only just formed. I think we were at the first conference 2017, and there was a handful of people there and a handful of stands. And yourself, you'd obviously, I think you were sort of just starting out in the space as well. You look at where the ecosystem is, it feels like an eternity, but it's, a few years later. Everything you've done, Dexter, you've been fantastic for the industry, obviously, and what you've done with this show and your business, but Fintech Australia as well, and the sort of ecosystem and the businesses coming out of it. If you look at, there's a public list of VCs in Australia, and you're scrolling through the various sheets, there's probably hundreds now of listed VCs. So I think even though we're in a slight sort of down market at the moment, the ecosystem and the support network is great.
Yeah. I had a little bit of melancholy actually at Intersect, and it was, just looking around, you and Stuart weren't there. Gareth wasn't there. And it's kind of great that you're not, but then there's others who aren't there because, look, they're fallen soldiers, right? And it was kind of just a moment where it was, hey, we're really moving into the next phase now. And there's kind of the, that first generation, that's gone, and now we're into this kind of next generation of founders and businesses that are evolving and growing. And we've still got some from that first generation that are clinging on for dear life. So it feels I'm optimistic, but it feels a little bit kind of, strange at the minute. I've got to be honest, the whole environment.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. And yeah, there's obviously Gareth, Luke Howes, Luke, and Darlin and Blair as well, and obviously Dom Pym is in probably a different league to the rest of us as well with what he's done. But I guess all of us, Gareth, recently, he's probably just fresh out of Frollo a month or two ago. But I think hopefully all of us, and there's probably others there as well, can, all keen and interested in putting something back into the ecosystem. But, I've caught up with some of your podcasts on Intersect. It sounds like it's, is it close to 1,000 people there, or however many companies represented. So a lot of those businesses, I'm sure, will come out to be, very successful and, probably maybe much larger than perhaps some of the ones that have come before, and in turn, hopefully recycle a lot of that. Like, it's probably Silicon Valley's obviously been going for a lot longer than anyone else, and even you started seeing that wave, the second wave, come through a bit through London and Europe.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll get a bit of a snowball effect, and it'll just continue out here in Australia as well.
Yeah. We're obviously moving into very, very different kind of economic conditions for startups. I think those, what we've seen in the last 10 years and certainly in the last few years here in Oz, I think we're not going to see over the next 2 to 3 years, particularly in the amount of capital that's available. Bootstrapping, the good old sensible, putting your accountant hat on, growing the top line whilst controlling or reducing the bottom line. It's a skill that's in demand right now, I can tell you. And every brief that we're getting is, I think clients are keen to meet with people who've been business leaders through economic cycles. As you kind of have the bootstrap experience. What are some of the things that you think you can bring to this next wave of startups? And if people are interested in kind of reaching out to you and they've got something, what are the types of businesses that you think you're best suited to help, and founders?
Yeah, look, we're pretty open. There's a pretty big focus, sort of Centauri Ventures is the fund Stuart and I have set up off the back of Look Who's Charging, so people can see us centauri.vc or via LinkedIn. Should be pretty easy to find us on LinkedIn. So climate tech, energy tech, clean tech, whatever you want to call it, is a big focus for us, as I know with some of the other fintech founders in the market as well. It's probably really looking for a bit of meaning as well with what you're doing with the time. And if you believe what's happening is a very real problem, which we do, then the entrepreneur in you takes over, and you really want to play your part in trying to solve some of those bigger problems. Some interesting space, where fintech is combining with climate tech or clean tech in some areas of the market. So there's a couple of investments we've done in that space.
Green growth keeps getting a mention.
That's the one. Green growth. Yeah, we sort of invested in that one. Not so much an investment, but we did a reasonable bit of mentoring and advisory work with Kogo, Connecting Good out of New Zealand. They've gone live with CBA or in the process of Westpac, NAB. So we were able to do some good work with what we've done at Look Who's Charging to bring them into they've got very quick traction with a number of the major banks in Australia. So yeah, I guess to your point around bootstrapping and being lean, that's probably gone out the window. I think the last few years, it's safe to say.
Yeah.
But very much now back in fashion. Just thinking back with Look Who's Charging. I mean, up near where you live there in Valentine, Dexter, was our first office in Swansea, Belmont. We had an old dentist surgery. Stuart spent his Christmas holidays with a sledgehammer knocking through the walls of this old dentist surgery. We kitted it out with some third-hand laptops. So we maybe had 7 or 8 people. We had third-hand laptops we'd sourced from somewhere. Some free tables. We didn't even have chairs. It was just fitness balls and chairs. Whenever me and Stu would go down to Melbourne, I come from the corporate world, corporate Amex. It was all Jetstar and the Sky Bus all the way. But, we'd always be sitting at the back by the toilets on the plane. But we really thrived on that, I think, as a business. There's no looking back. You're all in the trenches together. And even as the business was more successful, we'd still be on the Jetstar flight, and me and Stu would still be sharing an apartment down there in Melbourne on our trips. But I think definitely learning. There's probably a couple of parts to that. There's learning to sort of love and embrace, that journey. But also around the founding team, what we're really looking for. We're surprised with the number of tech startups we see who don't have a tech founder.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
So what generally happens there is, the money gets burned very, very quickly because you're reliant on external parties. But the money's one thing. But the second thing is then it becomes very hard for the founding team to even do the most simple of things, because inevitably they'll get, a month's worth of time and attention from whichever dev agency they're using. Then the dev agency goes on to a bigger piece of work or a different client. And, to do the most simplest of things, there's so much cognitive baggage and stress that comes with it. So, we're really looking, if it's a tech focused business, for us, it's a must. There has to be a tech founder on that team. So if you've got the sort of lean mentality, and at the end of the day, then if you've got a tech founder and, maybe 1 or 2 other people, the lights can stay on that business for a long amount of time. Even worst case scenario, right? They've all got to go back to work part-time 2 days a week. They can still keep the lights on and the business running.
Yeah.
So we quite like those, those sort of businesses as well.
So going back to your kind of early days, Stuart knocking the walls down, getting an office. You can save a lot of costs by not having an office now and everybody working remote. When you look back, do you think you would have had the success that you did with Look Who's Charging by having everybody working remotely, or do you think you had to have everybody in that environment together, kind of getting that sense of camaraderie and building something?
Look, it's a bit of both, Dexter. I think, the developers on the team, you arguably get more out of them remotely, or 70-80% remotely.
And you've got access to a global talent pool, right? Who a lot of them, if you can get them, are going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than Australian developers.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And we found though, I thrive on having lots and lots of things on my plate at once. If I have 1 or 2 things, I struggle, but thrive on having lots of different things. And you could argue none of them require super cognitive energy. Whereas the developers, I think they're on highly cognitive tasks, and it's sort of very one thing at a time. They liken it. They tell me they liken it to writing a novel. You might sit there for 6-7 hours, not get anywhere, and then you have this magical hour where everything comes together. So if they're in an environment where there's the morning tea, or there's this activity, that activity, or someone wants to chat, that really stops them. We found can stop them from doing their work. So the developers we found thrived more in a environment without distractions. But half of our team were early mid-20s, who really thrived on coming in. It's your social life, they're your friends. So it's probably a bit of a mix for us, Dexter. I think between the sort of different elements of the team.
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess, look, if people are interested in getting in touch, I know you're doing advisory work as well. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, David Washbrook at LinkedIn. I sort of see the messages through that, or Centauri, Centauri, Centauri.vc as well. So please feel free to reach out. Always happy to make introductions or give advice, etc. as well.
Right. Well, that's a lovely little segue, because the last question that I do have for you is, to all the founders that are out there early stage founders, what would be your number one piece of advice?
Number one,
other than getting in touch with you.
Yeah, there's probably two key things. Let me see. Well, maybe I pick. So I think
I'll give you two, right? I'll give you two because you're so good. I'll give you two, right? Extra bonus one for our listeners.
All right. Well, two key things for us. I can take laser-like focus, right? It's either product or it's sales, right? Everything else is just noise. And when you start a business, there'll be lots and lots of noise. So I think keeping laser-like focus on things that really matter and being able to say no, or there's certainly a skill in just ignoring things that don't matter. I think that's key. And also staying true to the problem you are trying to solve. You must experience it as well, Dexter. A lot of the businesses that we meet now, I really, really have to concentrate to try and work out the problem they're trying to solve. And then when I see one of my friends, when I meet someone afterwards, or I go to my wife or someone and I try and explain what that business does, and I get lost and they've got no idea. So it's really, finding out what that problem is, articulating it clearly and staying true to that as well, I think would be a key bit of advice.
Awesome. Well, David, it's been great to catch up with you. Thanks so much for sharing this. It's just been awesome. Even though I know you well and we've had this chat many times, I just never get sick of hearing you talk about the experience.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dexter, and thanks very much for all the hard work you do as well. I was flicking through the podcasts yesterday, and you're up to, was it 180 episodes or something?
So yeah, we got this is number 125 of the actual one-on-one kind of Fintech Chatter interviews. But all up, we've released, I think, something like 220 different pieces of content now, including the Finnies and some of the kind of shorter form stuff we've been doing recently.
Yeah, it's great value. You go through all of the people you've had on there, but great exposure for those businesses as well. And, quite often the first thing you do now when you're looking at investing in a company, or I'm sure, if you're looking to sell to a bank, go on Spotify, type that person's name in and, they've got a website, etc. But sticking it on when you're in the car out for a run and listening from that person. So I think, it's huge value there. So well done, Dexter.
Well, thanks for joining me, David. And thanks to all of you for listening. If you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. And if you're new to the show, make sure to follow us and leave a review. You can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. And until the next episode, stay safe. This show is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We find world-class talent to build world-class fintech ventures, and you can find us at tier1people.com.